morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today we need to take a look at what is going on with the prices of Black Bolt and White Flare. You see, I came around end of last week and I said, hey, look, usual ruling here, usual plan, usual advice, don't buy singles. Singles are way too expensive right now. I showed you a bunch of examples. They were, to put it bluntly, absolutely horrendous. So what we need to do now is do that thing we usually do when the set's been out for a few days, where I come back and I essentially show my working, prove my point, show you that I was, in fact, not talking rubbish all along, and we look at what has been happening to the prices in just a few days. And I'm going to ruin the surprise. You know they've been crashing, right? You know they've been crashing. The question is, what are they looking like now, and how hard have they been crashing? That is what we need to go and figure out. So we might as well start off with the big boys, because there were some truly big boys in this set. I'm talking, of course, about the black and white rares, the Reshiram, the Zekrom, and the Victini. So starting off with Zekrom then, I showed you the other day that we had one of these that had sold for $820. I suggested to you that maybe this was a rather substantial amount of money, and the $820 seemed a little bit ridiculous. And I didn't really think it was going to end up there when all was said and done. So, with that borne in mind, if we head on over to eBay right now, how much do we think we're paying for this Zekrom? Bearing in mind, I showed you the last sold was $820. There were bids. That's what it actually sold for. Well, right now, you're talking somewhere in the region of $450. You will find a few that are creeping up to the $500 mark. $450 is about what we're looking at for Zekrom here, but there are a few sales that are creeping up a little bit higher, up more towards the $500 mark, but they are essentially, paying a bit of a premium. One of the things to remember is when you got cars like this, where the pull rates are this low, you are going to end up with annoying situations where there's just not enough sales to get a really clear look at the exact price. So it's about $450, but there just aren't that many of them being sold, which means, at some point there's going to be a couple people going on looking to buy one. There's only going to be one available, and it's going to end up ticking up to 500 just because there are people ready to buy and there just aren't any others on there. But generally speaking, we're looking at about $450. Which you may notice is a significant drop. We were looking at $820. It's now about $450, so you're talking about a $370 drop. That is 45%. That is 45% down in the space of just a few days. So there's your Zekrom. What about your Reshiram? What about your special illustration rare Reshiram? Well, when I showed you the other day, we were talking, there was one which actually was a bargain at $390, and I said at the time that was actually pretty nice. But generally we were speaking about $1,100. There was one $1,100, one best offer accepted on $1,250, so let's call it $1,100. Okay. Do we think, perchance, that Reshiram is still going to be $1,100? No, obviously not. Obviously not. I mean, if we have a look right now, there's 3 solds as I'm looking from yesterday, and we've got a best offer accepted on $400, a best offer accepted on $500, and then an actual sale for $470. So basically, we're looking at around about that same price. So if we put it at $450, and honestly $450 might be a little bit generous, but let's say we do. Well, that means that we've actually gone down by $650, so that's a drop of 60%. 60% down in the space of a few days. When I come on here and I tell you guys, to stop buying singles, it really isn't worth it, This is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Now, as I always qualify, there's some people that just want it early and don't care. They know they're paying over the odds, but they've got the money and they're just absolutely fine with it. There are some people that are buying early because they want to get the first one graded or whatever. And yeah, if you've got a reason, then absolutely. I just need you guys to know that these early prices are kind of absurd. Now, the red Victini was a little bit all over the place. I showed you this little trio where they all sold for about $900. But then I also showed you this pair where one was $975 and one was $625. And remember that the red Victini is actually in both black bolt and white flare, and that is changing things up a little bit. By the way, I'm just going to answer a question quickly that I've seen popping around the internet in a few different places. Hang on a second. Why are the black bolt and white flare Victini not the exact same price? The answer is random variance from a small sample size. And I know that's not a very satisfying answer, but there aren't that many that have been sold, and nobody really cares if they're from black bolt or white flare. If one of these two sets was massively more expensive than the other, then that would translate to the Victini being massively more expensive in that set, because the set as a whole was more expensive. That's not where we are with black bolt and white flare. It is just random variance because we haven't got enough sales. I fully expect it to come down to about the same price regardless of which set it comes from. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. So putting a price on it last time was a bit awkward. Let's say somewhere in the region of $900. What have we got sold recently? Yeah, it's about 400. Two that have sold for 400, one that sold for 520. The 520 is too high. But again, it comes down to there just aren't that many being sold. So somebody goes onto eBay, and that was probably at the time they bought it, that was the cheapest, buy it now, so they bought it now. It's a bit more expensive than the others, but that is going to happen. When there are very few sales, there are going to be times where you just kind of have to bite the bullet and buy whichever one's there, or you have to wait and exhibit patience, which, when we're talking early days in these expensive cards, generally not the kind of thing we're used to, exhibiting patience. So this is somewhere in the region of a $400 card, so let's call it $900 previously, down to $400. That is a 56% drop. Yeah. When I say these things are dropping hard, I mean they are dropping hard. All of these absolutely crashing. Cool. Let's move away from black and white rares. Let's talk about the special illustration rares. Let's start with the Reshiram. When I showed you the other day, it was a little all over the place. It was one that sold for $365, one that sold for $510, and one that sold for $650. Incidentally, these were free sales in a row. And they were all bid. So, yeah. There's, it's really hard to exactly try and figure out what's going on here, but that's where we are. Are we at that level of price now? No! The lowest I showed you previously was $365. Now, here's the last free sales as I'm looking, and the highest was $250. And now the other two were a little bit lower. We are talking just price crash. And to be clear, I still think there's a chance that this is actually still too high. We're still early on. This is still more expensive than some of the other big special illustration rares from the other sets. But I told you, $400, that would basically put it as the second most expensive special illustration rare in the entire Scarlet and Violet block, and that was a ridiculous proposition. Well, yeah, it's come down pretty significantly at this point. What about the Zekrom? Well, we had free sales here. We actually had a $750, which was just to buy it now that sold, and then $370 that was bid, and then $500, but that was the best offer accepted on that. So, again, a little bit all over the place, but the lowest was $370, which I think is very important. What do we see here? Yeah. There was actually a sale for $335, which is not that much lower than what we saw on the thing I just showed you. but there was also a sale for 200. One takeaway here is the sales for these are still kind of all over the place. But again, we're talking about a new set, low pull rate cards, very sought after, few of them being sold. It takes quite a lot of sales to bash the variance out here. And we just haven't had enough sales to get rid of the variance. And that is essentially the answer. We haven't got rid of all the variance, so this is where we end up. But I think we can agree it's still a pretty significant drop. Maybe it's not as high as it could have been. Well, if you look at the 750, it's a huge drop. If you look at the 370, it's not. But the point is, it is coming down very nicely. Again, had we looked at this as it was previously, we would have gone, well, this and Reshiram are the number 2 special illustration rares in the whole block. That's not realistic when Prismatic Evolutions exists. So this was always going to be the case. So they're the big cards, but I want to show you one more example because this was a little bit silly. I showed you full art Zekrom. I showed you that there were 2 sales for about $50, and I suggested that $50 for a random full art was an absurd amount of money. Yeah, it's a $12 card. It's worth a quarter of what it was before. It's come down by 75%. The idea of a random full art being $50 is absolutely patently absurd. That was absolutely ridiculous. When I was searching around on eBay the other day, this one really jumped out to me as a, hang on a second, that's dumb. Why is anybody paying that? And there were multiple people that were paying that. And I told you that that for a full art was just absolutely ridiculous. Well, yeah, it was absolutely ridiculous. And it's corrected quite nicely. There was no way around, even a Zekrom full art was never going to be $50. Correcting down to $12, yeah. $12 for a playable full art from a hype new set. That I can agree with. Most full arts are a few bucks. But this kind of makes sense. $50 was never going to happen. But I've told you about it all now. So now it's over to you guys. Tell me what you think about all of this in the comment section. Go nuts! Be nice! And please do remember to leave a like and a comment, because remember, with the new YouTube algorithm, likes and comments mean a lot more than they did before. And we need to finish with a shout out to the unknown one of our lovely followers over at patreon.com/PTCG Radio. Been supporting for a while, seems to be a very lovely person. So shout out to them for the support and the loveliness. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.